Hi, and welcome to Spooky Hours. My name's David Saunderson, and today we're joined again by author of Britain's Haunted Heritage, John West. How are you, John?
I'm fine, thanks. How are you?
Good, thank you. Today we're going to be talking about a former church south of Colchester called Langenhoe Church. It's been known as one of Britain's most haunted churches. And when we had a discussion a couple of weeks ago, me and John, we were talking about Borley Church as opposed to Borley Rectory. And John, you mentioned Langenhoe and said that we should talk about it. So that's why I've asked you to come back here today and go through that. Now, just before we start, just to remind people, thank you to everyone who's been supporting this channel over the last couple of months. I think we're doing well. We're getting quite a few new subscribers and lots of comments on our videos. Just like to ask you, those that haven't subscribed, just to click on the icon down the bottom, and also there's apparently a little bell there. If you click on the bell, you'll get notified anytime there's a new video from Spooky Isles. We're tending to do about one a week at the moment, and we're really focusing on classic ghost stories and horrors from Britain and Ireland. So I know you wouldn't want to miss any of that. Now, John, talking of classic ghost stories and investigations, you can't get much more classic than Langenhoe Church, which I believe was investigated by Peter Underwood.
It was, and the haunting actually was over a 22-year period as well, and the church was as badly haunted as a Borley church. It's not as well remembered now because sadly the church was knocked down, but fascinating case, one of my favourites actually. I first read about it as a child and I've sort of been hooked ever since.
So it's south of Colchester, but it's 20
Yes.
miles from Borley. Now there is a connection with Borley, isn't there?
Yeah. Well, basically, the Waldegrave family owned land in Langenhoe, and in the 17th and 18th centuries, the rectors of Langenhoe also covered Borley Church. And there is a theory that the figure of the woman that's seen in Langenhoe is the same figure seen in Borley. I mean, I think that's stretching it a little bit, but who knows? I mean, a previous Reverend Borley used to make a joke that his ghost used to flit over to Langenhoe, occasionally for a change of scenery. So who knows?
Yeah. So can you tell us just generally about the church itself? It doesn't exist anymore. What's the history of Langenhoe Church?
Well, it dates back to the 11th century, though most of it was the fabric was 15th century. And it was basically just a parish church, and it was badly damaged, very badly damaged in the Great English Earthquake of 1884. And you can Google it, and there's photographs of the church, and the roof is basically almost gone. The walls are cracked and things like that. And it was a really bad earthquake. I think a chap called Peter Haining did a book about it in the 70s or 80s, and the church was never structurally sound from that moment on. So I mean that could explain some of the things that later happened there. But there was nothing particularly interesting about the church. It wasn't notable for any architectural features or anything like that. But it did have this reputation for being badly haunted.
Okay, tell us why? What was the hauntings that made it such a reputable haunting?
Well, it all starts off with a chap called the Reverend Merriweather in 1937, and he was a rector who came down from the north of England to take over the church in the area. And he wasn't interested in ghosts. He never had any paranormal experiences before that. But when he went to the church, he seemed to trigger something, and things were seen. For instance, the very first time he went there, it was the 20th of September 37 was the first experience that he had. And he was in the church on his own, and there was no wind or anything, but the door slammed shut so hard that he described it as if it was like a train hitting the building. And he also had problems in the church. He had a case with papers in there, and he could not open it in the church. He tried several times, and there was a witness to this as well. Soon as he left the church, it opened fine. Now, I know people could say, well, that's just a coincidence, but that's not just the things that went on there. There's a lot more. It sort of quieted down for a bit, actually, and it's 1945. The next important thing happened, Easter Sunday, and there was a lady and a daughter, Gertrude Barnes was the lady's name, and they were decorating the church for Easter Sunday. And they put flowers around the church, and they put these flowers in a vase, and they went out of the church just to get something. No one had entered the church while they'd left. And when they came back, all the flowers in the vase had been laid out on one of the pews. And no one could find an explanation for that. As I said, no one else was in the church. No one had entered the building as they'd left. So that was a bit strange. And then things went quiet again for a time. And then it was the autumn of 1947, and Merryweather was looking around the hall, which was adjacent to the church. It's still there. Parts of it, most of it dates from the 18th century. Though apparently it was built on the site of an earlier building. And the lady was showing him around, Mrs. Cutting, and she said, "We don't like the front bedroom, no." And he said, "Why is that?" And she said, "Well, we get an uncanny feeling here. You know, we don't sleep in it. There's an atmosphere in this room, so we don't use it." And he said, "But you got a lovely view." And he was gazing out the window across the fields and that. And she had to leave to get something. And while she left, he felt being embraced by a female form, a ghost. And he admitted later to the Reverend Borley that the figure was totally naked. So he was embraced by a female phantom, which is why I call the chapter in the book "The Naked Embrace."
Yeah, well, so lucky for him, but hopefully his wife didn't find out that he's getting embraced by naked ghosties.
Yeah, I don't think he was married actually, but I think he enjoyed it. I think it's probably the dream of every male ghost hunter, is it? To be embraced by a naked lady.
So do we have any idea why the area was so what is about, you said it was based on a previous church. Was there anything historic there that would indicate why it had so much hauntings?
Well, there is a theory that seismic activity can activate paranormal stuff. So the earthquake, as some people have claimed, paranormal researchers, that the earthquake activated the hauntings. There are a couple of legends connected with the church, because when Peter Underwood looked into it, he found that there was a story that a rector had an affair with a woman, and when he tired of her, he'd murdered her and buried her in the churchyard, or in the church itself. They're not too sure. And then there were also some seances held in the church in the 1950s and elsewhere. And a similar story came through a Ouija board. Now, I'm a bit skeptical of Ouija boards because you never know what's really coming through. But it was claimed that a lord of the manor during the reign of James I, Robert Atford, I think was his name, and he'd had an affair with this woman, a maid. And again, he tired of her, murdered her, stabbed her to death in the church with a knife, and he'd hidden her body either in the churchyard or underneath the flagstones of the church. So that's the legend. I mean, we don't know. I mean, it's interesting that the activity really kicked in with the arrival of Merryweather. There's one theory that the ghost of the woman that was murdered was drawn to him because he was a rector, and she'd had an affair with a rector. Perhaps he looked like him or something like that. But that's the stories about it. And Underwood also discovered that prior to Merryweather going there, the earliest, I think, account of a ghost was 1908. And a gypsy family had been staying in the area up the lane from the church. And the two girls, I think it was like midnight, had heard the church bells ringing. And one of the girls had seen a figure which she described as looking like a nun walking towards the church and actually vanishing through the wall. And then they could hear singing from inside the church. Although, interestingly enough, her sister didn't see the nun, but she heard the singing. And there was also a tradition, I think Underwood was told, a woman was told in 1910 that there was a legend of a woman in white haunting the church and the churchyard. And it was apparently supposed to be a cursed area as well, Langenhoe. There'd been a large number of suicides there. 9 children had died in the hall along with their mother. There was a couple of haunted cottages with poltergeist activity. But I wouldn't infer too much from the suicides and that, because rural areas, even now, sadly, do have a high suicide rate, and the mortality of children in the 19th century was really high anyway. I mean, I've looked in churchyards and you'll see, it's tragic, but you'll see tombstones and that, children that died like 1 or 2, and that's a whole row from the same family. So I don't think the curse has any weight to it. Although it is interesting that some of the cottages are haunted or were haunted, and there was this tradition going back before Merryweather of a female in the church and in the churchyard, and of course she was seen by by one of these gypsy girls as well.
So you mentioned the churchyard itself, and I believe that still exists. The church doesn't exist, but the churchyard does. What's that like?
Very atmospheric. It's not maintained. It's totally overgrown. All the tombstones are lopsided. People have had a funny feeling when they've gone there. Again, I know we discussed this before. If they're aware of the haunting, they might imagine things. But people have felt very drained after leaving the churchyard. And I went there with a previous girlfriend, and she claimed to have felt the ghost of a little girl wandering around. The church was knocked down in 1962, by the way. Various theories why that was done. I mean, as I said, it was structurally unsound, and it never happened now. But sadly, in those days, they thought nothing of knocking down medieval Tudor buildings, even in the 60s. And but yeah, the other theory is that the church authorities knocked it down because Merryweather had been so open about the ghosts, and they didn't want people going there. I mean, you imagine if it still stood now, you'd have people going there as much as they go to Borley and probably causing a lot of problems for the locals.
Yeah. Talking of today, though, what has there been any investigations in the area recently?
I've seen on YouTube a few people have gone there and claimed to have picked up feelings and orbs and stuff like that, but I don't think there's anything really serious has been carried out in recent years. I mean, there's an atmosphere there, definitely. I've felt that, and people, as I said, do feel drained upon leaving it. The church, there's no trace of that now. It's just covered with nettles and that. So, but yeah, there's been the odd investigation, but nothing conclusive. No apparitions have been seen or anything like that. Although she is still supposed to haunt the churchyard, this woman. We can talk a little bit about what Merryweather saw if you want.
Yep. Okay. Well, tell us what he saw. That's the.
Yeah. Well, basically, all the things that happened in the church mostly happened around him, and skeptics have said, "Oh, well, he made it all up." But again, if he was on the church on his own a lot of the time, and the activity, he's bound to see more. But he would hear. I mean, for instance, there was problems during services in the vestry. They'd hear like clods of earth being thrown around, and that happened on 9 occasions. They'd searched the area, couldn't find anyone. And he would smell violets in the church, like perfume. Rotting flesh was experienced by him, the smell of rotting flesh. Once he was getting coal for the church, and he went outside and there was a pile of it, and he had an iron rod, and he suddenly felt a presence around him. So for the hell of it, he jammed the iron rod into the coal and put his Beretta on there, and it started spinning round madly. And he went back into the church, and he used to carry a dagger with him. Now you're going to ask, why would a rector carry a dagger in a parish church? Well, this was in the 40s, and sadly, even then they had problems with hooligans using that, and he didn't feel safe. So he had this dagger. I think he brought it back from abroad, and it was actually pulled from his belt in the church, and he heard a female voice saying, "You were a cruel man," and that shocked him, as it would. And other things were heard. Locks would be damaged. He heard a gunshot in the church, like a rifle, and some of the stained glass was found scattered all over the church floor. He heard a cough coming from a statue of St. George. Lamps would burst into flames. Candles would go missing. Candles would be blown out. And once he saw a figure of a man in a modern tweed suit. I think this was one Christmas Eve. Walked in front of him. That was the only time that happened, but he saw the ghost of a female in the church on 3 separate occasions. And she was always described as wearing like a cream dress with some sort of headdress, in her 30s, about 5 foot, about 30 years of age actually, about 5'6", oval face with blue eyes, and she always looked sad. And she appeared during services, but none of the congregation ever saw her because she was at the back of the church. Now, what he should have done is said to the congregation, "My God, look behind you," but he never did. And she always vanished through a wall, and the wall seemed to open up for her. Now, the first time this happened, he examined the area where she'd vanished, and there was a bricked up doorway, which he wasn't aware of.
That's cool.
And so he saw her 3 times altogether, and like I said, he saw this modern man as well. I mean, God knows what that was all about. But he also heard muffled conversations in the church, at least 2 or 3 people talking, and like a sigh at the end. He heard a woman sort of go, "Ow," like that. And these things, as I said, went on for about 22 years. There was another occasion where a handprint appeared on the vestry door in chalk of a female. It was a female hand, and that lasted for about 10 days and then just faded away. He heard a woman singing in the church, described it as like sort of French song. And once he was coming back from the hall, and he saw two workmen who'd been, and they were looking through the keyhole in the church. And he said, "What's the matter?" He said, "Why are you doing that?" He said, "Well, we heard someone singing in the church in French, and the church was locked." And they didn't believe him that there wasn't someone in there. So he said, "Well, look, come in with me." And he unlocked it, and they searched the church. No sign of her. So all things like this were happening. It was really weird. Other people went there, and one chap found a brick wrapped up in newspaper on the steps of the church tower, and he swore that no one had gone up there, the Reverend. But I mean, that could have been the hooligans, of course.
Yeah,
We've got to accept that some of this could have been them. The clods of earth being thrown at the vestry, the gunshot, the stained glass being broken, the brick. But that doesn't explain all these other things. This woman being seen, especially, and the smell of rotting flesh and flowers being moved and things like that. And plus, of course, the haunting went back to before he went there.
So what do you make of it, though? I mean, I know you just said that a lot of those things can be explained by just the hooligans. What do you think of this this vicar? Do you think he was on the straight up, or there might be something else going on?
Well, Peter Underwood interviewed him, and he regarded him as a very credible witness. He found him honest, truthful, and he was also open to natural explanations to these things. He didn't just say, it's a ghost to get publicity. And he had nothing to gain by this, because the Church of England, even today, if a vicar started saying, "My church is haunted, come and have a look," they wouldn't be very happy. I think he might have been a little bit psychically aware, and his presence generated this stuff. And if the legend of this woman having an affair with a rector is true, then perhaps she was attracted to him because it reminded her of a past love. I know this person supposedly murdered her, but there might have been some connection there. I'm not aware that he had any experiences after he left the church. I think he retired in 1959, and as I said, the church was pulled down in 62, and he died in 65. But Peter Underwood was a pretty clever chap, and he'd investigated a lot of hauntings, and he could tell when people were lying, and he does admit in his books, he caught people out. But Merryweather was someone that he regarded as telling the truth. I don't take too much stock, regarding the Ouija board sessions, because anything could be said. And this Robert Atford, there's no record of a person of that name from that time that I'm aware of. And if he was Lord of the Manor during the reign of James I, there should be some record of him. But there was obviously something going on there. Something had happened, and this woman was seen, like I said, on 3 separate occasions and by other people. So whether it was the earthquake that activated it for some weird reason, or like I said, it was Merryweather was a catalyst and that's why it increased. It's just all supposition. We don't know. But the fact that it went on for 22 years is pretty amazing. And other people in the congregation witnessed some of these things. The workmen heard the singing, saw things being moved, the flowers and stuff, and the candles being blown out, and pretty weird, especially hearing a statue cough.
Yeah. So I mean, it's definitely a fascinating case. You've said you've been there before. Is it some place that should I go there? Am I going to see anything?
Well, the thing is, as Elliot O'Donnell, I think, once said, the other paranormal investigator, if you go looking for things, nothing happens. It's always when you're not expecting something, it happens. It's well worth a visit. There's a little business centre just on the outskirts. You have to go by, and they're quite happy for people to go to the churchyard. It's not private. You can go there. Obviously, the hall is private, so I wouldn't recommend people knocking on the door asking, "Can we go and see the haunted bedroom with a naked lady?" But you can walk around there, and it's very atmospheric. Like I said, it's a very oppressive place. I didn't see anything. My girlfriend at the time felt that there was a ghost of a girl there, but it is well worth a visit. You need to look it up on a map, though, because it's not well signposted. And the first time I went there, I got lost. But once you get there, and like I said, there's a little business centre there, some huts and that. And if you knock on the door, they'll say where the churchyard is if you get lost. I've also got this, actually, which is a bit of Langenhoe Church. And that's part of the roof.
Okay,
that's a nail hole when it's secured to the roof. Probably medieval. No ghost connected with it. So I've never had any activity, but at least I've got a little bit of the original church.
There you go. That's wonderful. Well, thank you for that, John. Again, a wonderful piece of Britain's haunted heritage, and people could get a copy of that from Amazon. Also, people should know that there's an article by Eddie Brazil, who wrote Shadows of the Nave, who also goes into Langenhoe on the Spooky Isles on the website. We'll put that in the link link below. Sorry. So anyway, thanks for that, John. I see you're still in COVID time with your hair there. Is there any chance of getting a haircut soon?
I hope so. I mean, I live in a town called Saxmundham, and all the flipping hairdressers, you go in there and it's, oh, we haven't got any bookings for another month. And then you go into another town and you go, can I have my haircut? We can't do walk-in bookings. You can't come in here. You've got to book it. So you sort of, and then it's, well, we haven't got any bookings for 3 weeks. And I mean, is everyone getting their haircut at the moment? I don't understand it.
Oh, well, okay. Well, at least you've got something scary to look at each time you look in the mirror, I suppose, with that
Yeah,
hair.
no,
So,
especially
yeah,
on the side.
it
I know.
is. It's a
Like
bit,
worrying.
bit like Larry out of the Three Stooges there with the hair there
Yeah,
like that. It
yeah.
is. That's
I
looking
prefer
great.
Wolverine, but there you go.
Wolverine. All right. Anyway, thanks for that, John. We'll talk to you next time. You take care.
And you. Cheers.